All right. You know what it is. You know who it is. We're back today,
Yes, sir.
here for another episode of the BG Perform podcast. I got my co host, Coach Jerry Hayes.
What's up? What's up? What's up?
We're back. Jerry made a life altering decision this weekend and
Fuck
quit
yeah.
his gym job, which
Well, it
is,
was last weekend.
well, last weekend, yeah.
Yeah,
But like it's official this week.
official.
He's back on the grind. It's an
Yes,
exciting
sir.
time. This is what we're made for. This is what we were made for.
Fuck that place.
Yes, sir. We're getting back to it. So today we're going to be talking about learning from the history of fitness. And what I mean by this is I want to talk about how sometimes new isn't always better in training and how the basics are so important and it's something we can always go back to and why this modern day style of bring the field into the weight room isn't always correct. And I want to dive into it from both of our perspectives, obviously, and just talk about a couple things that I think are really important with that. We're going to go with a 30-minute AM today. So we're going to set that timer for 30 minutes. We're going to do our best to stay within that time. If you know us, probably not going to go over too well, but at least keep us honest and go from there. Are you
Yeah, if
ready?
you're driving within like a 30 to 45 minute window of your destination, you might be getting there just on time for it to end. So
Yeah.
we'll
Yeah.
do our best. We'll do our best.
Yeah. And if not, just keep driving in circles until it finishes.
Yeah, you don't turn that off.
Yeah.
You don't turn us off.
You just keep going. Even if it's, you got to drive around the blocks a couple times, whatever, go to the gas
Mhm.
station, just go do something. Stay in the car.
Mhm.
We're
Mhm.
gonna start this in three, two, one, and good. So, one of the things that's really important in my eyes in regards to training, and I've come back to this so many times as of recent, is really diving in not well I've come back into starting to dive into the true history of fitness, right? And then taking that and kind of putting it into today's world of, where do I see it kind of take place? And I think we can all agree, and I find this again and again, is like in modern history, there's so many things that repeat itself throughout time, throughout history, throughout, main event or big events in the world, right? There are things that just constantly happen. Like if you look at the stock market, if you look at the housing market, any of this stuff, you constantly see these ebbs and flows or these bull and bear markets where things just kind of get that way and then they just fix themselves. And I think with history of fitness, I think too many people ne ignore the benefits from back then, right? And fitness is a relatively new thing. And I don't mean new as in like, like it just started, right? But like new as in it's evolved very, very it's very early in its evolution, right? We realistically, if we look back, Arnold and these two guys, really Arnold, and even before him a little bit, Eugene Sandow, like these guys were kind of main people who brought fitness into a different light, especially Arnold, because Arnold, was someone who was not only in the mainstream media at, after his rise in bodybuilding, but he was someone who was an actor, he was, a politician at one point, and a very influential figure for his time. I was just telling Jerry, but I have this book here that I've dove into. I haven't dove into this one yet, but if you haven't seen his documentary on Netflix either, that's great. Definitely something to check out, especially if you're a fitness fan. But so when we look at this stuff, these types of individuals back in the day, these, for me, especially Charlie Francis, Arnold, you're looking at, all these old school coaches, Louis Simmons, who really kind of paved the way for everything that we see today. And I think a lot of people kind of overlook things because it's very common in technology, right? When we look at like the iPhone, when we look at computers, that like that stuff's just kind of like obsolete. It just doesn't work anymore with like the modern software. And I think with fitness, we kind of treat a lot of things in that same breath. And I don't think we can and should do that with fitness. I think if we really look back and we see where performance has kind of gone in the last, we can say 40 years, right? I think because of the improvements in medicine and because the improvements of education, the improvements of human potential in general, right? More food more often, sleep is improving, environments are improving, right? Like overall, I guess you can disagree or agree with that. But anyways, like the overall the quality of life for a human is improving, right? As opposed to maybe 50, 60 years ago. And with that being said, athletes are more explosive, they're lasting longer, they're higher IQ, there's more experience, right? And they're able to kind of see themselves through these phases of their career. And we're getting people like LeBron who are playing for 21 years at, the highest sport. You're getting people like, the Shohei Ohtani, who's a baseball player, who's playing both positions for at an elite level for the first time really ever. You could count Babe Ruth, but does he really count because of the time he was playing? I don't know, right? I was actually listening to this, or my friend was telling me, he was he used to eat just like hot dogs and whiskey before every single game.
He played with like a cigar in his mouth, I'm pretty
Yeah.
sure.
Just I love Shane Gillis's joke about that.
Yeah.
Willie Whitey steps up to the bat. Or it might have been
And
Bill
now at
Burr.
the plate we got old Curly.
Yeah. I think Bill Burr was the first one to make a joke like that. But anyways, you know, when we look at the athletics or the time of athletics, it's changed, it's evolved. There's so many better athletes. The potential of the athletes is so much higher. And really, as strength coaches, I find that our job is increasingly more and more becoming get these people healthy and ready to play their sport, right? And what I think a lot, or what I think happens a lot in strength conditioning, and Jerry can attest to this as well, is we see too many people take the field, right, and they try to bring it into the gym. One, and two, they're always trying to, and I don't want this to come out wrong, so I'm going to try to word this right. They're trying to break the mold on stuff that doesn't need to be broken, right? Innovation is something I admire and I want to go and search, seek for and search. But we need to understand that a lot of the times with human performance, if performance is the goal, there are basics that always are going to work, right? And I always say this, I've said this so many times, but if we stick 80% with the basics and still get 20% of just trying stuff, that's going to be great, right? And we're still going to get a lot of time, a lot of reps, a lot of what do you want to, how do I call it? Like practice going into those different fields and trying different movements or innovating, right? And that's the main thing. But 80% of what we do has to be kind of be stuck in this stuff that we know works, especially in performance where there's a timeline, there's a goal, and something has to be achieved, right? And I think that what we see here too much is people try to go too far outside the box too often to either get Instagram likes or to just seem different. And again, it's great to innovate and it's great to kind of seek that next step of what we do. But I think too often we forget how effective and efficient some of these old school coaches were. The Buddy Morrises, like I said, the Charlie Francis, Louis Simmons, maybe they weren't, you know, thinking about long-term health in their programming like we would nowadays, or there wasn't really a rehab process or a thought for that. But even if you go back and look at Charlie Francis, who is really renowned as one of the best sprint coaches and speed coaches in the world, he talked about the importance of massage and the importance of recovery as much as getting people out there and getting stronger and faster, right? And I think that the one thing I keep seeing nowadays is this constant kind of, like I said, this desire for growth that almost bites us in the ass because we forget about the beautiful things that do work in fitness and the foundations that we have that can work very effectively, right? And one, I think I find that in fitness, we're one of the only industries that does a really bad job of showing the history of fitness, right? Like I think that when we look at the history of, the United States, when we look at the history of finance, like tech, when we look at the history of a lot of these different fields, there's people we can name that are kind of like household names, right? Realistically, the only household name in fitness you can really find right now is maybe Arnold, right?
Yeah.
Unless somebody, I don't know if you know anybody off the top of your head that would be like a household name. I mean, even like
It's
Bumstead.
all the 80s action heroes are like the people that are known in fitness, and they're just known because of their movies. Like
Yeah.
that's yeah.
And it's not to say that like, we want fitness to turn into like, you know, celebrities or anything, but it's just I think that not enough people know about the great names inside of fitness and what they've done in the past, right? And I think that one of the things for trainers now that might be listening to this or people who do come across this in general who are, people who are interested in fitness nowadays, I think well, let me start back for a second, then I'll get back into that. But as I've seen this, I've taken a little bit of a detour in my training or my learning to go back and see, right? And I'm working on a little project. Well, it's not a little project. I'm working on a project that I'm going to be hopefully, working on for the next year or so. That's going to kind of introduce this stuff and introduce some of these figures and introduce some of these people because I think it's so important for us as trainers, right? And I'm talking in the context of like me and Jerry, but any trainer in general, to understand what kind of got us to where we are, right? Who are the greats in our field that got us into this point, who opened those doors, who innovated to a certain point. And I think that a lot of days, a lot of times now in fitness, it's really hard to innovate because there's so much technology, right? Is something that none of these people had in the past. And if you look at one of the things I told Jerry, as we are kind of talking about this episode before, was, when you look at some of these athletes back in the day, look at the sprint, for example, right? When you look at Ben Johnson, who is Charlie Francis's basically main student in sprinting, right? I know in sprinting, tenths of a second are huge differences, right? But I don't remember his exact number. I might be able to pull it up, but basically he wasn't that far off from what Usain Bolt's world record was, right? And it took, somewhat close to I think 30 years for Usain Bolt to then break that record after, right? And it was only by like a tenth of a second, maybe more. So it's crazy that we're seeing again these modern day athletes who have the best medicine, the best teams, quote unquote, the best educated coaches, the best equipment, all that, and they're still only minusculely better than some of these old school athletes. And obviously, I think the thing that people need to understand in regards to performance is across the board, everyone's better now, right? Like the level across the board is so much higher than it was back then. They still had those standouts, right? They still had, the Ben Johnsons, they still had, say, the Magic Johnsons, they still had the Barry Bonds, even though he was juicing, right? But either way, like they still had those standouts that were amongst the best and what I would call like kind of generational talents where it's like you could throw them in any generation and they were going to be amazing at their sport, right? But across the board now, easiest way to explain this, like 1 through 12 on a basketball team back then, maybe one or two could hang in the NBA today, right? Nowadays, 2 through 12 would be some of the best players in the world at that time. And it's just because the game's better, the coaches are better, the accessibility is better, right? The knowledge is better. But I think the performance overall from back then with having less, doing more with less, a lot can be kind of taken and extrapolated from these coaches and put into the modern framework, especially if you're a new coach, right? If you do not have any experience, if you don't have a lot of time under tension in the field and you haven't worked with a lot of people, the basics of going back and saying, okay, what did these guys do with nothing? Right? They didn't have force plates. They didn't have fucking, I don't even know what I've like Kaiser machines. They didn't have assault bikes. They didn't have all this stuff. So finding the ways that they worked around that to create solid programs that created very high results, right? And yielded very high results with you know a lot of people. That's where we want to start, right? And then in this modern take on fitness where it's like, hey, I have all these different VO2 max machines, I have blood testing machines, I have insert the sports science machine here, force plates, jumping plates, whatever it might be. Now we can actually start to take the basics and make them that much better on top of it, right? And I think what happens nowadays is we kind of get stuck in technology. We base a lot of what we do around testing and numbers, and it doesn't always equate to better results, right? And like I said, I think my main idea with this and why I want to dive into it is because I see so many people now in the coaching world just going completely AWOL, right? They're just kind of going off the edge with everything that they do, and they're making fitness a lot more difficult, especially performance, right? If we're going to stick with the idea of performance, but they make it much more complicated than it has to be. And just because someone can do something doesn't mean that they should be doing it, right? And I think that with a lot of this stuff, it's just if we actually looked back at the people who kind of built the path for us, then we could see a lot of positives from just understanding the basics.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things too that with the weight room, and we can honestly do like a whole 30 minutes on this topic in general, but sports specific training.
Yeah.
It's like you can train to translate to a specific sport, but we've said it before, most training, especially with athletes, 90% of it's going to be the same. And then you got that 10% that's going to be like wiggle room for individualized work. But I remember seeing a coach who was training some lacrosse, some lacrosse
I'm
athletes.
down there, Mike Tyson.
Yeah. Oh, speaking of Mike Tyson, he looks mean. Talking about athlete, bro, generational talent.
He's gonna get,
Jesus.
unfortunately.
He's not gonna get knocked out. Brandon's crazy. Don't worry about him. But anyway, I saw a coach he had his athletes, and this wasn't like a lacrosse coach. He was a strength conditioning coach. Had his two athletes. He was working with these two, maybe high school, college girls. They had their lacrosse stick, a ball, and a medicine ball. And they were in like a crouched position with their left arm rolling the medicine ball forward, cradling the lacrosse ball and the stick in their right hand, forward, and then walking it backward, and then forward, and then to the side, and then the side, and then backward. It's like, leave that for the field. Like, leave that for the field. When you're here, do the work you need to do in order to make them better at their sport. It doesn't necessarily mean continue lacrosse training in the gym. So that's one of my biggest pet peeves is people try to get too sport specific with things when they're trying to be, what's the word I'm looking for? Like innovative,
Yeah.
and like bringing it to the basics, just make sure that they're strong, make sure they have rotational power for shooting, make sure they have change of direction ability in like your warm-ups, but also develop the strength to plant through the ground for that change in direction. So like when you're in the weight room, make sure you're utilizing your time with your athletes, bringing it again, the basics work to the basics. Yeah, you can get a little flashy here and there to spice things up for progression, but you don't need to bring the sport into the weight room.
Yeah, and I think one of the things you mentioned there, right, is there's a time and place for some of this stuff. And like I said, if we follow the 80-20 rule and 80% of our training is the stuff we know is going to make us better and get us moving in the right direction, then that 20% can be really whatever, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And it can be stupid, it can be innovative, it can be whatever. But I think what we start to see now, and obviously we don't know what some of these people are thinking. We don't know how much of this is actually in their program. But we start to see so much of this 20% now that it's like kind of seeming like it's more than 20% of some of these guys programming, right? And I've had a couple run-ins or experience with people who, for example, in MMA, it's so popular to say, I'm going to put bands on someone's arm and have them punch really fast, and that's going to translate over to like speed. And it's like, okay, like, sure, like that might feel like it or seem like it, but at the end of the day, when we look at this stuff, we have to look at it from an actual standpoint of what is actually going to create adaptation, right? Putting a band and, punching with it is not going to create the adaptation that we're looking for. What's going to create adaptation that we're looking for is giving them the opportunity to work on the characteristics that are going to help them punch in their training, right? So shoulder protraction, retraction, elevation, depression, working on the serratus, working on hip rotation, working on thoracic spine mobility. And then when they get into their actual training, right, they're going to be able to express that at the highest level, which is they're going to benefit from that, right? I think sometimes we get this blurred line where strength coaches try to become like skill coaches, and it's not always a bad thing. And like honestly, if you can understand both sides of your sport, it's very helpful. But I think sometimes we have to really kind of take a step back and just understand that the sport doesn't really have a or doesn't always have a place in the gym. And we can really just get a lot done by understanding the basics, right? And when I want to dial this back just a little bit because I don't want to get into the sport specific question too much. But what I want to get into is when we look at history, right? And we look at the history of what some of these guys have been able to do with such little in the industry is sport performance really just comes down to the general aspects of training, right? And even regular fitness. I think even regular fitness, if you look at some of the ways that these people trained, and it's, I think, part of me believes that Arnold was so influential because his training was adaptable that anybody really could do it, right? And if you really look at it, it's just basic uh isolation movements, split up by day, upper body, lower body type thing, and it's done in a way with eating right, staying healthy, that whole vibe of things. And I think maybe today what we have is more information on what that actually looks like, right? Like what does being stress free actually look like? What does a healthy diet actually look like? What does proper rest and recovery actually look like, right? And I think that through the history of fitness we can really see a lot, like I don't know. I guess I'm going to ask you this question because you're right in front of me, but I don't know how much you have looked at, you know, how fitness is kind of laid out in the past, right? Or what it looks like, how the training regimens were, what a basic split looked like. But it's just stuff that again always works. Like it's just kind of it's kind of crazy that, it doesn't matter how high your training age is. If I was to go into this book right now, right? Into this Arnold book and take what he has as like a training program, for example, like if I go in here, let me see if I can find something that we can talk about quick. So we got bench press, we got pull-ups, we got barbell press, we got bicep curls, calf raises, wrist curls, let's see, stretching, talks about overtraining. And maybe, I think a lot of these ideas at this time were maybe not fully described as they are today. But just even looking back and understanding the beginning thoughts and ideas about what some of this stuff looked like, like how much has it really changed, right? How much has an Arnold program that you've taken actually changed, right? Maybe it's not the best for full human performance, right? And that's where some of this newer tech and all that stuff comes in. But again, coming back to the basics, 80% of the training we do, if it sticks to the basics of get stronger, stay healthy, and move a little bit better, like not only is your performance going to be better, but even from a more basic level, your life's going to be better, right? Imagine if 80% of the population started moving on a regular basis just to get a little bit stronger, feel a little bit more healthy, and move better.
We're
Think
paying a lot less on healthcare.
think about
Yeah.
how many problems that we have today would essentially be solved. Mental health disorders, physical health disorders, all that stuff, right?
A lot of sleeping disorders, even, dude. Like,
Yeah, and I
just
think
people
that
would be able to recover better.
Yeah, and I think a lot of what kind of stops people is this constant push to be new and innovative and again, I don't want to like it's tough because I don't want to come out of here and be like innovation is bad because that's not what I'm trying to get at here. What I'm trying to get at is the innovation has its place, right? And it has its little spots that we can pick and play with it and choose with it. And especially in our own training, like us as coaches, we should be taking time. And this is something that I was thinking about the other day is, you know, most people in their field, they're they're able to kind of be in their field all day, right? I was watching a video of John Million and he was making his new song Kid Again. And just think about it. He could sit in the studio for 8 hours and just make noises and play and make beats and whatnot. It's really hard for a trainer to just sit in the gym for 8 hours and play, right? Like I could, but like at some point physically it's going to take a toll on me. But in that same idea, it's like I can try to find more time to be in the gym to play around and make beats, right? And kind of like create new exercises and create new ideas and thoughts and supersets and things like that and see how things go together. And I think that for me, one of the biggest ways I've progressed in the last, say, year or so was really kind of going back and looking at like the history of fitness and just kind of looking about back and saying, all right, well, who are these people that have kind of like started this process? Who are the individuals who have had these ideas and where did they start from, right? Like French contrast isn't a new thing, right? It's been around for a long time, but like we see people introduce it as if it's brand new or utilizing it in a different way. But a lot of these modern day things that we're learning or these concepts and these ideas that we, utilize in our training are old and they're, they've been around for a long time for as long as we can go back and read. And I think that fitness is one of those fields where if you try to reinvent the wheel, you're gonna kind of get a little bit lost, and you're not gonna be in the right zone, and you're gonna put people in danger, or I wouldn't say danger, but like you're gonna put people in a position where they might not perform their best. When in reality, if we kind of look at the history of fitness, right? And we kind of take these pieces and then implement those into what does the modern day athlete look like, we're going to get a lot more bang for our buck in that training, right? And the basics again, and it sounds cliche, it sounds, whatever you want to say to it. The basics are always for the most part going to work for most of the people that we work with, right? And again, this kind of goes back to that conversation we had a couple episodes ago of like the it depends answer. But again, for most people, it depends. But if we use a lot of this stuff from even going back to like the Arnold Age of Fitness forward, there's so much that like can benefit an individual or a population of people, right? So I guess, like I said, the biggest thing in today's world is history in general can teach us a lot. And I think that the history of fitness is something that oftentimes gets overlooked or not even really discussed or talked about because I don't, I don't know why, right? And I hope to be the one who kind of reignites this conversation and is able to kind of bring a lot of this stuff back up because, you know, I want to I want to be someone who's talked about in the history of fitness, right? But I think that when we really kind of discuss these ideas, there you have to know who the people are that kind of got you there, right? And none of them had social media. None of them, I found the first guy who was kind of philosopher talking about this stuff. And I think for me, that's what really kind of gets me excited about it and learning is seeing some of the things he talked about being so old and hearing it in today's world like it's brand new information. And it's like, oh wait, okay, so like maybe this isn't new, right? And maybe this is just something. Oh, like where did it start? What are the actual understandings of it? When was it actually used? Where was it actually used? Where did it originate? And that type of thing teaches us so much in regards to actually utilizing the information and getting the most out of it. So when we do train our athletes, they're getting a better experience, right? With the better medication, with the higher quality nutrition, with the higher understanding of what actual training should look like. Because I think realistically, the thing back in the day that they may have struggled with was efficiency, right? There was no level of efficiency in what they did. It was just Arnold got in there and said, you're gonna do 10 sets of 10 of everything or 10 sets of eight, whatever he ended up doing. Like if you ever watch his documentary, he kind of dives into the he dives into the way he used to do his sets and his exercise and all that stuff early on in his career. And it was just basically do enough so that the muscle gets tired and there has to be adaptation, right? And I think that what we learned today is that we can be a little bit more dose dependent and we can be a little bit more efficient in our exercise selection, meaning we know what supersets go with which, we know how to train muscles in a certain way, we know when to rest, right? We know what signs to look for in fatigue, we know what signs to look for in helping someone push it, right? And I think we have to take advantage of that with the idea that there are a lot of basics things that work inside of fitness from the past that if we just take a little bit of time to study, we can really get a lot out of it, right? And yeah, is there anything to add on top of that?
Yeah, I think it's just important to look back and realize why they did those things. And like you said, they just found that it worked. And changing things just to change things doesn't really it doesn't push the field any further. And I think there needs to be a rhyme, a rhyme and a reason to what you're doing. And I think about it all the time when it comes to athletics and in general is if like if you were to look at a sport, like you're not going to change the way you shoot a basketball. Like you're not going to start like going like this and doing like a hook shot or anything weird because we know it works. But we also might do something outside of the weight room that trans or outside of that sport that can assist them in shooting their basketball, whether it's hand-eye coordination stuff, whatever. You don't need to change the main thing that you're trying to focus on. You can tweak things around it to benefit what you're trying to accomplish. And it's the same thing with fitness when you look at Arnold and all the greats. The reason that we know what to do is because they use themselves as guinea pigs. They were the initial scientific experiment to find out what works. So we have that base. We could build upon it, but we don't need to try and scrap it and like start all over.
Yeah. And I think that's really it. It's just that like when because I think in today's world there's a lot of things that occur that happen and we're kind of just like, what do we do? Right. And this is just like general, whatever you want to call it, general day-to-day life. But if we actually look back in history, a lot of this stuff has already happened and it's been handled. And it's like, okay, if we just go back and look how it was handled here, we can either learn, did that work or did that not work? And then we can improve on it, right? And it's the same thing in fitness. There's so much that I feel like has not been tapped into the history of fitness. And really on both things, like general side of fitness and performance side of fitness that once we dive into and we actually understand, we're going to get so much more out of it. And then we can apply our modern day understanding, our modern day knowledge of recovery, our modern day knowledge of emotions, our modern day knowledge of balance and efficiency. And that's going to make so much more sense, right? And I think that's where one of the things that I've seen a lot of success in with the athletes that I've worked with is, not trying to do too much, not trying to step in and be this guru, right? Being like, I have all the answers all the time. It's, hey, I know what works. I think I have an idea of what works. Now let's add in some modern day aspects of efficiency, recovery, you know, peaking, balancing, a little bit of what do you call it? Periodizing, right? And putting things in at the right times, and you get great performances, right? And I think that once you understand the basics, then you can start to really branch out and really utilize this modern view on performance. And I think that's all I have to say on it right now. And I think, unless there's anything you want to add to it, no?
No, we've pretty much covered a lot of right there. Pretty
Yeah, I
much
mean,
all of
we're
it.
right about on time with
We're getting
the
better.
yeah, 3150, we'll say we're gonna call it.
Yeah, we're
Yeah,
getting
so
better.
I think the main takeaway of today is go back, learn about the history of fitness, right? And whatever the field it is that you want. There's people who were well before us that were doing great things, and it's great to learn. And I think that any person who excels in the modern day era has to go back and learn from the people that were there, right? And kind of find the people that influence them. And you look at this in any capacity, even if we look at the great philosophers, right? Because philosophy is something that I've been diving into a ton. All these guys had teachers, right? They all, you know, they all learned from one another. They all had people that learned from them who taught them. And it was just this kind of trickle down of information that each one became more wise and more wise, and then kind of, did their own thing. So I think as coaches, for us, one of the great things is kind of dive back, see the history, and really understand where it all started, and then kind of transition that into modern day health and performance. So I appreciate you guys for tuning in. Appreciate
Appreciate.
appreciate. You're on Ashton Kunjin's Pond. There's too much tuna in your sandwich.
We pranked you, you stupid idiot.
Here
If you
we
don't know what that's from, watch the Kroll Show. It's a classic.
classic. And yeah, so I appreciate you guys for tuning in. Again, just learn the history, go back, dive into it. And if you have any questions, you can always reach out. I think my name on here is right at
It
BG
is.
underscore or at Coach Jerry Hayes. We appreciate you guys. We'll see you guys next.